How we as patients could strengthen our voice and our place around the table to make sure that not only we look at how we can have a person-centered in healthcare in terms of the approach that the healthcare and the physicians are taking, but also having a more equal partnership. We talk about decision-making for the patient. We talk about giving them the decision power, but we do not give them the tools or the means. So by educating the patient, by giving them this opportunity to be able to hear the research, to be able to take that in and to take the decision based on this, I think it will open doors for patients in terms of empowerment. Hi, I'm Elisabeth Kasilingam. I'm the CEO of the European MS Platform, and we are based in Brussels.
And I'm Brett Drummond. You're listening to the ECTRIMS podcast, the official podcast from the European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis. At ECTRIMS 2022 in Amsterdam, an exciting new addition was added to the conference calendar, Patient Community Day. Understanding that people living with MS and other autoimmune conditions of the central nervous system are a critical part of the ECTRIMS mission, this event was developed with an aim to ensure that the important messages of the conference were reaching the people that are most impacted by them. At ECTRIMS 2024, Patient Community Day was once again a huge success, with around 400 people attending on site in Copenhagen and another 1,800 participating online in a completely new format. Our podcast coverage of Patient Community Day will be provided in two parts. My guest in this Part 1 episode, Elisabeth, is highly passionate about patient advocacy, which is a central part of her role at the European MS Platform. Elisabeth, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start with, it would be great if you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself, as well as EMSP and your role there.
Yeah, so I've started working with the European Multiple Sclerosis Platform in 2009, so it was a while ago, as a project coordinator, because I was very much interested into patient advocacy. So that was really the start, the beginning of my career then. And I also got involved with the European Patients Forum, which is a patient umbrella organization, which I'm serving now as the vice president. And my role, my work has led me really to look into how we as patients could strengthen our voice and our place around the table to make sure that not only we look at how we can have a person-centered in healthcare in terms of the approach that the healthcare and the physicians are taking, but also having a more equal partnership in the systems. And I think that the last years that has been growing, and it's nice to see that there has been a positive evolution in that system.
Yeah. I mean, everything you said there aligns perfectly with the mission of Patient Community Day. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit around your thoughts and why you think the addition of an event like Patient Community Day is such an important part of the ECTRIMS calendar.
So this addition has been actually quite amazing for us to see, because we have been at ECTRIMS every year since many, many years now. So it was a very good achievement to see that finally patients were recognized and given a space, a forum to be there. Where I remember times where they were not allowed in the ECTRIMS forum at all. So that was really a good sign to see that there was that willingness to get closer to the patient. This gives the possibility to bridge that gap that exists between the neurologists, between the scientific field and the patient community, give the space to be heard. And as I said, it's about equal partnership. We talk about improved decision-making for the patient. We talk about giving them the decision power, but we do not give them the tools or the means. So by educating the patient, by giving them this opportunity to be able to hear the research, to be able to take that in and to take the decision based on this, I think it will open doors for patients in terms of empowerment.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm sure in your role you see this a lot as well. How important do you think it is that they get this information directly from the source? I mean, we know online there is a lot of misinformation that can be really prevalent. So being able to give them access to information that they know is coming from a really accurate place where they can be directly involved in those conversations.
I think that's great because that's reduced a bit the timing. Let's say that when it comes to scientific translation towards lay language, it always take too much time. Mm-hmm. So that's one benefit for the patient. But it needs to be safeguarded because coming from the source, it can be confusing.
Yes.
It can be misleading also. Mm-hmm. So it's the same as going on Google and looking at information. It could be the right information, but misinterpreted. So there should be some safeguard. And that's why it's important to work with the right organizations, with the right people that can translate that. And it's nice to have a collaborative approach, that it doesn't come from the scientific community, neither from the patient community, but that it's a collaborative approach.
Yeah. I really like the term that you've used a couple of times already around equal partnership, because I think that is a central part of Patient Community Day as well, that this isn't a one-way conversation. This isn't just about researchers talking to people living with MS or people with NMOSD or MOGAD, but it's about having that conversation going both ways, because the research community also has a lot to learn from people living with these conditions. Is that part of what you describe when you talk about this equal partnership?
Yes, of course. I think that there is, it's like, as you said, going directly to the source. The patient is the source. It's nice to hear what are their needs and what are their expectations, and to be able to meet them. So being around that within this discussion and to be respected for that, it's important. And again, I remember the time when I joined EMSP, then we come around the table with the scientific partners, and it could be a bit difficult at the beginning to just understand what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And then it's not that they do not respect you, but then you do not meaningfully contribute. Yep. And so having this type of event, it also helps us for when we have our community advisory boards to teach the patients what they should know to be able to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. And I guess through that work, you obviously have a lot of direct connection yourself with people living with MS. What sort of feedback have you had from them around the importance of this event? And obviously this event has now been running for 3 years, and you do events yourself in that space.
It's been very much welcomed by our member organizations and the different patient experts we are working in. As I said, they've been trying to be part of ECTRIMS for a long time, and they've been denied that they would have to work after ECTRIMS to get to know the learnings, to translate that in an accessible way, and so on. So having this day, making that more easy for everyone, it's really something that everyone is very grateful for. I think for the future, it's going to make a big change.
Yeah. And I think what you say there is also important, why we have this as a separate event at the end of the conference. I mean, making the conference itself open to people living with MS is part of it, but sitting in scientific sessions is not necessarily going to be the most useful part, but having an event where we can specifically communicate in a way that is easy to understand but maintains accuracy and is accessible to people. You know, I think that's a really important part of it.
Yeah, as I said, I think that it's not even like in Europe, across the world, we've seen the need, the people that are eager to learn. Yeah. So it's nice to be able to provide that and to be able to support that. And I think we as an organization have a lot to do to be able also to contribute to this community day and to be able to help guide what are the needs of the patients and how we can bridge that gap further and be the means also for to get the message to the patients.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess thinking forward beyond, we've had 3 iterations of Patient Community Day. This is obviously something that's going to be an ongoing commitment for ECTRIMS. What sorts of things do you hope get built in? You know, what things would you like to see more of done in this space around bridging the gap between research and things communicated at ECTRIMS and people living with these conditions?
I'd like to see more closer collaboration in terms of translating those research. The experience from last year was quite clear that it was still too scientific for a patient community. So it was nice to have those learnings and to be able to give feedback and contribute in how to shape that better, to make it really accessible for patients. So I hope that in the future we will keep collaborating on the agenda and having the possibility to work together in terms of translating those. Because when we work with the scientific people, it's often that they they speak their own language and they are not really, even if they're trying, they are not really successful in reaching out to the patient. So we will need to work together further on this. And that's my hope, that we will get at that point where it will get easier for people that are not scientific or researcher to understand what we're talking about and how it impacts their life.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point in terms of how we put together the program for Patient Community Day. I mean, attending ECTRIMS, we see that there are so many different sessions, and there's obviously a lot of really important topics that we're talking about from a research perspective. But this understanding that topics that are really interesting to the scientific community and really important that are discussed at the conference aren't necessarily always aligned with the same topics that, people living with these conditions want to hear about. And that was a focus of Patient Community Day in Copenhagen this year, is making sure that the topics that we talked about were ones that we know people living with MS and people living with other conditions are important about. But this changes all of the time as well, doesn't it? I mean, you would know, the topics that people are interested in one year change to what they are the next year. So keeping a finger on the pulse of what is hot in these communities and what are the topics they want to hear about are really important. And you must get a lot of that in your role anyway in these interactions. How much do you find that it does change in terms of the topics that people are interested in and their engagement with these different topics?
So I think it's changed regularly, but in terms of the scientific topic, the common concerns are always higher priority. Access to treatments and with the progression of the disease are the concerns of the patients. And then we have the other, let's say, it's not less important, but maybe less recurrent in the request that we receive. But then, except aside of this, I think there are a lot of eagerness from the community to, as I said, to be involved in activities that can help them to be empowered. That means to be included in clinical trials, to be included in research, to have a possibility to contribute. To be able to understand why the data matters, for example, in research. And so those aspects can be reinforced with this Patient Community Day. Yeah,
and I think it's a perfect segue to what I want to ask you as the final question, but I think you've already hit on a really important part there, especially with people living with MS and these other conditions. We know that it's a disease that's filled with a lot of uncertainty, that they don't necessarily know what each day holds, and that empowerment and finding a way to take control is something that we hear is really important. And I think participating in research and engaging in research is one way of doing that. So as a final point, I'm interested for you to share a sort of message to people living with these communities, in these communities around, what would you say to them about participating in MS research?
My message to the people would be not to be afraid, not to be concerned, but really to give access to the information, to the data, as we call it, to make sure that we can build on it, that this will be used for the bigger research. We need that. We need that not on a ad hoc basis, but we need that on a long-term basis. So data collection is a process. And I also understand that they will have a lot of concerns about this, or that they might feel demotivated because they don't see the future, or they don't see that far in the future. They want an answer now. They're dealing with the disease today and not tomorrow. So it's important for them to see that future and for us to help them see that future. Yeah. And that can only be done if they understand what we're doing, what we're doing here. And I think I would add a message maybe for the researcher and the scientific community too, because I think the Patient Community Day is also an opportunity for them to join the advocacy work of the patient. So by doing that, we can really ally our forces and come together and work together to push the right message through and toward our healthcare system to make sure that we can influence positive change.
I think they are both excellent messages, and I think as when people participate in Patient Community Day and other events, this understanding of all of that data that you're seeing is there from people who have participated in these trials or in these studies before, and all of those people were individuals just like you who have decided to contribute into them. So I think really great messages. Look, thank you, Elisabeth, for joining us for this episode today. really insightful, and I think your messages are going to be really well received.
Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for ECTRIMS also for having me.
Thank you, Elisabeth, for sharing all of those interesting insights. This brings to an end part 1 of our special series on the 2024 ECTRIMS Patient Community Day event. Thanks everyone for listening. Once again, I'm Brett Drummond, host of this podcast episode and co-founder of MSTranslate, an independent resource centre that aims to simplify the complex wealth of information about MS for the greater MS community. The ECTRIMS podcast is produced and hosted in collaboration with 2 key partners, MSTranslate and the MS Journal, a peer-reviewed international journal that focuses on MS, neuromyelitis optica, and other related autoimmune diseases of the central nervous system. The 2024-25 ECTRIMS podcast series is supported by educational grants from Alexian AstraZeneca Rare Disease and Novartis. Educational grant providers have no input in the podcast content. You can read more about the topic of this latest podcast episode and more on the ECTRIMS website, ectrims.eu. Do subscribe to the ECTRIMS podcast on your favourite podcast channels and follow ECTRIMS on X, formerly Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube.